Well, welcome to the Business Spotlight series. My name is Tanner Bryan. I'm a senior partner here at ActionCOACH in Central Texas. And today I am joined by Brian Johnson, the owner of Canopy Management. Very excited to be sitting down with Brian here today, chat a little bit about his business, talk about business ownership, entrepreneurship, just that journey into being a business owner, all in. So excited to jump into some conversation here. Brian, thank you so much for investing some time to sit down with me. I'm going to hand it over to you. Why don't you just kind of give us a little background on who you are and what your business is?
Okay. Well, and first and foremost, for the Canopy Management reference, I want to make sure I give, shout out to my co-founder, Brian Burt, because obviously I wouldn't be here. Neither one of us would be here if it weren't for, the partnership that we had. So, as far as my background, I've been in e-commerce for the last 15 years. I've been in e-commerce, either on the seller side or on the solution provider side, or well, I guess those are the two primary ones in this space, both on eBay platform, eBay channel, as well as Amazon channel. I've been in the Amazon space for about 8 years now. Yeah. And I'm a data geek, so I tend to gravitate towards things like spreadsheets and software solutions and these kinds of things. Primarily when I had certain needs, I also had friends who needed additional help in the Amazon space. When I came over to Amazon space, I was still very green when I first started out 8 years ago in the Amazon space. I had all the eBay background, but it didn't apply to Amazon at all. And so I came over and fish out of water, and there was a lot of questions that I had I needed to try to get answered. And one of them was being able to get more visibility on my products, visibility on my friend's products. And my friend, his girlfriend at the time, now married, she had 800 SKUs on Amazon. So I had to figure out, how do I get more visibility? How do I advertise? How do I market these products in order to push them forward? And so when I first started out in this space, I've always been a generalist. I've always had a little bit of information about a lot of things. I've never been a specialist. And this was the first time that in my life, that I really specialized in something. And it's because I simply just had to. I went out seeking information and software groups who were talking about how to do this. Crickets. Nothing existed out there. There's nobody who had formed any kind of a group to chat about it or mastermind about it. There's no software, there's no training, there's no at the time, I don't even think there was probably even any advertising agencies in this space, because it was so new, even on the Amazon platform. So started a group just to mastermind. I figured, I'll get 50 people, honestly, just to solve my own questions, just to have a conversation with other people with the same struggle. That group has 22,000 sellers in it now.
Wow.
And so it definitely was a common question that came up. But one of the things that I found, and the reason I ended up specializing in this is I could have simply just said, oh, okay, was able to trade some information, able to figure some things out, I'll apply it to my product. And I could have just done that and left it at that. But what ended up happening is, apparently I gravitated toward the service side of the house, in that people would ask me questions and, oh, I know the answer. So I answered it. Everybody, 24/7. And so as the group grew, the questions got more complex, more difficult, and I didn't know the answer to all these questions. But because I had been put kind of on a pedestal of knowing the answers more than others, I had to go find out. And so I find that there's a saying that it's like, the best way to learn something is to teach it, and another way that is the best way to learn something is to teach it as a result of having your back pressed against the wall, not knowing the answer, having to go out and figure out the answer, figure out the solution, test it, and then provide the teaching. And that's essentially what I ended up doing. I ended up doing it for years. And so that's the reputation that I had gotten in the marketplace. But I didn't stop there, because I was like, well, I'm still a software geek, and so nobody has software. I got to make this easier. I got to automate something here. And so I started building software. And me and a couple of guys put together. And I will say the first software I actually made in the Amazon space burned, failed within 6 months because the partnership fell apart.
Ooh.
And we couldn't see eye to eye, and it just tanked, right? So it's not like, oh, every little thing I touch, turns to gold. No. Some of the stuff spoils. But the group was taking off. I wasn't monetizing it or anything, wasn't making any money. I was simply just contributing too many hours to helping other people. And but I started creating a software to help me, and then ultimately offered it out so that people could get better insights into advertising. And the first version was horrific. There's another saying I like, is that if you're not embarrassed by your first version, you're too late to the market. So it was embarrassing, but it was the best thing on the market still. So don't be afraid to just stick something out there and get criticized for it. That's okay. But that ended up being my first SaaS business that really took off. It was actually my third attempt, my second success, first one in the Amazon space. And so it's, we had a few thousand users, paid users on it. And that ran for several years. We actually just shut it down last year. And so that kind of took me to the next project, because I learned, after being kind of a, what do you call that? The eternal entrepreneur, the evergreen entrepreneur. You're always working on something since, you try to do the side hustle as a kid, and you just, always trying to do something, growing up. Right.
Yeah.
And nothing ever works until, 40 years later, when you're like, oh, now I get it. So I'm a 40-year overnight success. Right. But then I had who became my business partner with Canopy Management, the agency. He had actually reached out to me to hire me to coach him on his Amazon advertising. And he recognized right away is that I had way too much information in my head that could be monetized. And he was, one of these classic Russell Brunson kind of marketers. It's like, we can create a launch webinar on this and we can kick it off. And we did. We ended up coming out with 3 versions and did very well with those courses. It was a 4-week course, which I don't recommend to anybody, simply because the amount of work it takes for the subject matter expert to create it is massive. It's way underappreciated, that. But, and I'll probably tie into this later on, is immense opportunities for personal growth. And of course, that's comes through pain, right? And then it was about 5 years ago when we finally said, you know what, too many people keep on asking us just to do the advertising for them. So we kicked off the agency. Today, we have an agency with a little over 100 employees worldwide. We have now managed probably $2.5 billion in Amazon revenue through the agency and through my coaching and everything. So looking back on it now, it's kind of like, okay, it's actually a kind of a cool, progression of my career. But every single one of those, it sounds easy and you put it in summary, but there's a whole lot of in between stuff that there's pain that you just got to get through. So that's kind of the summary.
I love that. It's a phenomenal journey. And there was a couple notes that I made that I wanted to jump back on if we could.
Sure.
You had mentioned a partnership that ended up not working out very well, and then a partnership that ultimately worked out very well and kind of helped flourish things forward. I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about the importance of having kind of the right aligned business partner when creating a business and moving things forward.
The first one that had kind of the blow up of the partners is it's not uncommon for one of the things that I would probably go back and do if I were to live my life again, is to learn how like incubators and startup funding and getting capitalized and investors and all that kind of stuff in order to make something move a lot faster and to have the right people just right there instantly and just pay for it later. That's a whole idea I never quite wrapped my head around. I always bootstrapped everything I did, and I still do. And part of that is sometimes you just don't have the skills, the knowledge in order to get something done that you need to get done. And for me, while I had a light programming, software programming experience in the back, in my background, it wasn't current. It wasn't, what the current technologies, in other words.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up partnering with a couple of guys that understood the technology. And we just said, in my naivete, as far as a business owner is, oh, well, there's 5 of us, so let's just split the company 5 ways. That's a mistake. And I've done it. Unfortunately, I've done that a couple of times. To come to think about it, 4 times I've done that where it's like, oh, let's just evenly split. And eventually I finally learned is that don't do that. Figure out really what each person is bringing to the table. And then set aside a certain amount that's kind of like almost like flex ownership, where like one of the last companies I established with 3 people is we said, okay, 20%, 20%, 20%, 3 of us, we split it up, so that's 60% ownership. And then we've got this 40% float, or this 40% reserve for additional partners, or if somebody is doing more work than everybody else and they need a higher percentage, now we have that. Nobody's having to give up anything. You're simply just transferring the flex space, the flex ownership over to whoever deserves it the most. That is when you start getting some fairness. And I think with the first one, actually, in the first one, we actually they had a lower percentage. The 2 programmers, they were brothers. And of course, they were collaborating behind the scenes and saying like, hey, we're not getting our fair share and we're doing all the work. Well, all the front end work is, it seems when you're in programming, it always seems like, like I'm doing all the work, but there's a whole lot more to the business going on that is not appreciated. And I didn't know how to articulate that well enough, so that people understood how much work was actually being done and what skill set they didn't have that I did have or somebody else had. And so it just became a fighting match after a while about fairness and people showing up and not showing up. And so sometimes you just don't get people who've got the right work ethic, or they're very sensitive to being fair, or they simply just don't do the job that they promised to do. I've done that myself, not intentionally, but because sometimes that's how you learn that is not a strong suit for you, for instance. But yeah, the first one, it was definitely more of a case of just kind of being naive as far as companies and ownership and fair share. And you kind of want to try to play nice with the other kids on the playground, but sometimes it just doesn't work that way in business. Sometimes you have to kind of come in with a brutal thing. It's like, yeah, I'm going to hire you on, but you're not getting paid, but you're getting, a small percentage. Is that good enough? No. Okay. I'll keep looking. And not simply just spend your whole percentage on any one person or the people who start the company. Set aside some reserve because you're going to need it. You're going to need it for something that comes up, whether it's a change in ownership within the founders, or it is you got to bring on people that are out, that bring skill sets or abilities that are outside the founders, or you got to even bring in investors or new money that are getting like, okay, I want a percentage of the company. You're not having to constantly renegotiate with like, well, we're going to take 5% from you. It's like, no, you're not, so you kind of have to find the right people. My experience, or the way I've always done it is I've always tried to prototype kind of ugly, and then worry about making it fast and clean in the future. A lot of it turns out over the years, I finally learned is that my primary skill set is ideation and innovation, not people management, not, speed, process development, not, there's a number of things that I turns out I don't do well. But ideation and innovation are something that is just for whatever reason, it just works in my head. And it's something that I don't think that I always had. It's something that I ended up training myself to become. And it turns out I was actually pretty good at it. So that is something probably from a lifelong lesson is don't just assume you can't do anything because you don't currently do it.
Yeah.
You can
Yeah.
get
No, I love that. We talk a lot about that, the process of becoming who you need to become, and then going and evolving into that process. And I think there's a level of that there.
yeah.
Um, I absolutely love kind of the concept of, looking at what is this business going to look like and setting aside some reserves for kind of flex ownership ability, that sort of thing, from the beginning or early stages. I think that can be often overlooked. So I appreciate you sharing kind of those insights and those learnings that you've experienced along the way. So as you look back at this journey, which has clearly had some very strong highs, some a little bit of lows, that sort of thing. As we all know, most of these journeys are never a straight, perfectly positive line. Um, what would you say are, is one or two, call it memorable? They don't necessarily have to be defining or anything else like that, but a memorable roadblock or hurdle that you had to overcome that allowed you to become who you are today.
Let's take it in the scope of Canopy Management and its 5-year existence now. And Canopy Management primarily just does like advertising, marketing services for brands that sell products on Amazon and Walmart. And we got really good at it. And obviously, we've had quite a bit of success on that Inc. 500, all that kind of pat on the back kind of stuff. But this is something where, gosh, I've got a much longer list that I could touch on. But let me pick two things: first year and fifth year. From a first year standpoint, that was by far the most painful because that's when I signed on initially to be chief of operations and to make sure that everything executed well because I was the knowledge expert. I was the subject matter expert. The problem was that I had the knowledge. I knew how things should go. I knew how to come up with ideas about how to, innovate and how to create things, but not necessarily the process was not my suit.
Mm.
And because I failed so miserably at that job my first year, that my role was replaced by somebody else. And of course you can kind of hear like, well, that must have hit the ego. Oh yeah, many times, yeah. Because it's we don't want to accept that we're not good at something. But in hindsight, you can look back and say, I should have never done that in the first place. I know better now. And I knew that by the second year, by the way, not the fifth year, because we brought somebody in who was operational like that. And the first thing they focused on is like, okay, here's the metrics this company needs to hit. Here's where our processes. This is where I figured out it's like, okay, if you don't have a process that everybody follows consistently and is somehow audited or has some kind of oversight that's consistent, then you lack consistency in what you deliver as a service or a product.
Mm.
And so we'd have one client that we did just skyrocket awesome, another one that just tanked and failed and fired us, right? And it was because we just didn't have the processes in place. We were making it up as we go. I had it in my head, and somebody else that I hired had it in their head, and somebody else that I hired had it in their head as far as the way that they do things. And so we had 3 different versions or 10 different versions of doing the same job, and the results were very inconsistent. And it wasn't until we had processes put in place, systems, turns out to be proprietary systems that we capitalized in the future, that's when we started getting more consistent. One of the things that I learned from that is, as a subject matter expert, I had the 100% of knowledge, right? Like I knew pretty much, you could throw any question about Amazon advertising at me and I would know the answer, right? Because I've been doing it for so long. And I knew of all the different ways you can run advertising, all the, everything. So that's the 100%. And the big wake up call for me to check my ego, and as a co-founder, to check my ego and just give control over to somebody who figured out a better way to a better mousetrap, better system, was I came in and I did a personal audit, thinking it's like, well, I know everything. Let me see how the team is doing, right? Executing to my will kind of thing. Very egotistical, I guess, as far as that go, arrogant. Going in there, and it turns out they're only doing like 60% of what I teach and what I know can be done. And I got an argument with the chief operating officer. So I was like, how come we're only doing 60%? Response is, because that 60% we can deliver every time, every week, every month, every year, and make a consistent net margin profit for this department. Okay, I'll shut up from now on. In other words, they say it's like just because you can do all this stuff doesn't mean you should. Focus in on how do you make this business viable. We literally did not, part of that transition of hiring that chief operating officer that first year was because we had also hired a CEO coach that was local to us in Austin, Texas. And he came in and he said, well, you're this person and you're this other person. And this is your role. And this is where the role that you should be in. And of course, that again affected me because I wanted to be like, okay, co-decision maker on everything. No, you're not that person. You are, this is your corner of the building, and this is his corner office in the building, right? And eventually I learned how to accept that because it actually ended up working. But the point of that was he helped us put in a number of systems and checks and balances and methods to make sure that, again, our organizational and management processes were in place. Again, back to the processes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we literally would not have made it out of that first year had we not gone through that coaching. And that's the first time I had gone through coaching outside of the one coaching I did before that was like a Tony Robbins coach. And I didn't like that. I did it for like 6 weeks and I'm like, okay, it's wasting my time. I didn't get much out of it then. And it wasn't until years later that I realized, because I'm working with a coach now, and it's phenomenal because I finally took ownership of what I need to do on my side. It's a two-way street. It's not just the coach telling you what to do. You actually got to do it. Right?
Yeah. Isn't that interesting?
Preaching to the choir on that one, I'm sure. Same thing, with, whether you're in an advisory or consulting kind of role, is you're not just there to bring, fresh ideas. Sometimes you got to tell some bad news. Sometimes you got to convince people that, look, you think you know what you're doing, but try this other thing for a while. We've got a lot more experience, a lot more visibility than you have. So work with us on this, or else, frankly, and don't be afraid to say, or else, we've fired partners just because they wouldn't do what we asked them to do. We give them homework and they're like, yeah, I don't feel like I'm not going to do that. Like, that's your job. It's like, no, we're not your employees. We're your consultants. So processes by far create the most inconsistency that put our business at the most risk. And now I see that in every business I start. Every time we have problems, I realize, oh, we don't have a process there. Anytime there's a department with some drag or some backlash, some problems, oh, the process is 2 years old. We're not actually using that anymore. So it came down to, like, as much as I don't want to follow a checklist, or, follow a form because it's like it's beneath me or something like that, it works. It from a business standpoint, you've got to have that in place. Otherwise, you're going to get all kinds of, it's like, cooking food or mixing drinks, every time a little bit different. Sometimes it's not going to turn out well, and you can't afford to have it not turn out well. Because your reputation gets hit, your income gets hit. you hire too many people on, and all of a sudden you've got to back off, and you got to it's like, oh gosh, I've got to hurry up and go drum up business, or I'm going to have to lay people off. Never been a fan of laying people off. So that was first year. Fifth year, the drum that I beat pretty consistently is the what's in it for me, as in not me personally, but to whoever the consumer is, whether that's my customer, or the customer of my customer, that type of thing, is being able to answer succinctly what's in it for me within 5 seconds from a marketing standpoint of, before you create a service or a product or any offer, anything like that, know how you're going to market it, how you're going to sell it. Don't just assume it's like, well, I can just copy what they're doing. You'll get eaten alive. Know how you're going to differentiate yourself, how your benefits answer the question, what's in it for me, to the consumer, so that they can see that you stand out from your competition. You're not a me too. You have something special, something unique that differentiates you, so that they don't compare you or your service or your product to any of your competitors. If you don't do that, you'll get eaten alive by somebody who's going to just simply just price you down, keep on pricing you down until you're out of business. So that was the big. Fifth year obviously was a lot more succinct than the first year, because the first year had more pain, I think.
as I think that's usually the case. Yeah,
Yeah.
no, that's fantastic. I mean, those are some really important lessons. So for those that are watching this, like, pause, rewind. What Brian just shared here is a ton of knowledge in a really short period of time. That is like super impactful on the business. So Brian, thank you for sharing a lot of that. I think that really is incredibly important for those that are in business and looking to get from where they are today to where they want to go.
All right. Good.
So I do want to be respectful of time here. First of all, thank you for allowing us to go a little bit longer. But I want to, if I could, just ask you one question before we get to my final question. And when you look back at, say, your journey overall, not just in entrepreneurship, you can go back further beyond that, all the way into childhood if you want to. But when you look at the advice that you've been given, what's one kind of most memorable? It doesn't have to be the best piece, doesn't have to be the one that had the biggest impact, but what's been the most memorable piece of advice that you've been given?
That could go either way, positive or negative.
That's why I ask it the way I do.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I would say, like, because you preface it with which you could go back, even childhood. And I think certainly for my generation, the whole traditional idea of, go to school, get a good job, follow the rules, play nice, all that kind of stuff, it was a disservice to me, because I think that starting out younger, I should have, instead of spending 20 years in Fortune 500 corporate America, I should have been out there just beating the street trying to make businesses work. Way more fun, way more risk, way more, it's a lot more volatile, right? But way more rewarding once you get through your first couple of failures and onto your third or fourth, when you actually start gaining some momentum somewhere. I would have done that. I would have gone into entrepreneurship a lot more seriously early, rather than just like, oh, I'm going to do some weekend, side project kind of thing. So I think that was kind of partly the more memorable bad advice, is follow traditional, path that some previous generation took. From a positive standpoint, gosh, I mean, there's let me try to pick one here. There's so many. I mean, certainly, I think kind of what I was touching on before, I think is absolutely relevant, is I use, I want to say the what's in it for me, the we FM, the WIIFM, right? The what's in it for me, trying to solve that anytime you try to bring something to market is absolutely critical. When competition gets tough, that's how you stand out. But
Mm.
that's actually not really the advice. The advice I think is probably more along the lines of not or learning as quick as you can what your strengths and failures are and focus only on your strengths. Stop trying to do everything partially well or not even well at all. Focus just on where your strengths are, where your passion is. Passion absolutely will drive you forward, no question. And frankly, I mean, like, when I was younger, I'm like going to think, okay, what are you passionate about? I don't know. I like cars, like girls, whatever, right? It's like, no, that's not passion. That's just like whatever your, entertaining is. Um, Passion is something where you find that you just kind of gravitate toward it, and you wake up first thing in the morning and that's what you're like going, man, I wish I was doing this. It's like, oh, or I get to do this today. That's when you've really hit it. Is you wake up and you're like, I'm going to wake up early because I get to go do this. That's when you've nailed it. So you've reached that goal. But ultimately, it's something where you've got to get a lot of experience in your life, a wide range, in order to learn things that interest you, so you can then test to see, okay, is it interesting? Is it exciting? Is it passionate? Like, can I not let this one thing go, kind of thing?
Mm.
That's when you start figuring out what your passions are. You don't have to have just one, but it's the width. And I think that's kind of a problem with our current education system, is we've gotten so narrow in the education system in the US to focus in on how do I pass this next test on a limited number of subjects, rather than try to go wide and learn a little bit about a lot of different things, so that you can learn what piques your interests, whether you're a child, teenager, adult, retired, don't care, it could all apply. So I think probably the best advice is, you double down on what you find out you're actually good at, or you actually like to do, that you enjoy, and get off of you as fast as possible the stuff that you don't like doing. This is something I actually carried forward when I was in the first couple of years of Canopy. I would go through and I would have like monthly conversations with every employee. It's got a little bit big for me to do that now, and one of the questions I would ask is, or actually it's two questions. It's, what tasks are you doing in your job today that give you energy? You feel like more energy you could just keep on doing all day long, that maybe even are interesting. You're like, hey, I wake up in the morning, it's like, cool, I get to do this. That's what you gravitate toward. And then identify what are the tasks that you avoid, that drain your energy, that you don't want to do. There's somebody else in the company who wakes up and says, I wish I could do that. Let's figure that out. Don't get so pinned down in, oh, but that's part of my job. It's like, no, let's split up your job and give it to somebody, and split it up with somebody else who also loves it, so that both halves of this job get done with excitement, with passion, with energy.
Mm.
I'd much rather have that than to say, it's like, well, it's on your job description. Don't care. I'd rather have two halves working 100% than one half of a job dragging down, somebody until they're like, when it's like, yeah, I don't like my job, I'm going to quit.
Mm. Yeah.
And so that's something I should probably bring back up with the rest of the team again. I mean, we've got a very low turnover at our company, but it's an example of, whatever you're doing, take a look at the tasks that you're doing, and recognize what energizes you and what drains you. It's your body, it's your mind telling you where to put your energy, and figure out how to get rid of the stuff that drains you. It's too easy for us to just say, it's like, well, it's part of my responsibility, or I have an obligation, or I feel guilty if no, you can figure out, there's, AI, there's virtual assistants, there's somebody else who wants to do what you hate doing. Find that person, get it off of you.
Mm. I can't remember exactly the quote now, but it was something along the lines of like when you find that thing that's you're passionate about, and like the real definition of it was not necessarily that you're going to be happy 100% of the time, but it's a thing that yeah, you can keep doing, you're excited to do in general, because when you're doing that, you have the ability to go on long enough to see success. Versus
Right.
if you're doing the things that you don't like, even if it's exciting for just a few minutes, but it just totally drains you, it's hard to stay in the game long enough to see success. It's
Exactly.
something along that. But I think that aligns a lot with what you just shared.
Yeah. It's the draining stuff you've got to push away from you. And that can be people also.
Mm, that's so
Sorry.
true. So true. Oh, that's amazing, Brian. I like I said, I do want to be respectful of time here. So before we wrap up with my final question that I always love to end these things on, where can the audience go to find out more information? How can they find out more about you, find more about Canopy Management if they're in the market and are looking for services that y'all provide? Where can they go to get more information and start making some connections?
Yeah, sure. I mean, so in general, I mean, while I can certainly give kind of offhand advice for anything e-commerce, if somebody happens to be in the Amazon space, then I'd like to think that I'm pretty well known in the community after all these years. But I'm up on LinkedIn. Brian R. Johnson up on LinkedIn is probably the best place. And then I mean, our agency, as far as advertising and marketing of products on Amazon, canopymanagement.com is our site for somebody who's that serious or that needs that kind of support. But that's another way of reaching me as well, is through the site. Um, yeah, or look at podcasts and on stage, and you know at whatever favorite Amazon seller trade show might be going on. So
I love it. And I'll make sure to put the website and your LinkedIn profile in the description of this below. So if you are watching this, one of the best things, the coolest things about these interviews is actually connecting with others who have been on this series before. So go connect with Brian here on LinkedIn, kind of start that conversation. So perfect. Thank you so much for that, Brian. So as we wrap up, what is most inspiring to you today?
um, one of the things that I'm doing now, so I'm working with a personal coach now. And honestly, I never really believed in coaches or um, meditation and yoga and all these kinds of things. And now, as I'm 53 now, and so now I'm actually starting to realize, like, yeah, I probably should have been doing that many years ago. Now that I actually understand, and because part of that is taking personal responsibility for taking action, not simply just like, oh, somebody's going to lecture me or keep me accountable. No, that's not a coach. A coach is somebody who is allowing you to. I know certainly on mine, and it seems to be working very well. Is that he does a great job of. He doesn't talk. He's much like a counselor. He doesn't talk very much, but he knows the right question and the right prompts in order to bring it out of me, so that I think that it's my idea. But at the same time, it's I get so many aha moments of like, oh, now I know what I need to do. And so it allows me to focus more on my priorities. um, Time with family, time with my parent, taking care of my parents, whatever my business ventures might be. But it's absolutely worth it. No question, if you find the right coach, whether it's for your business or for you personally, it can pay off 10 times what you invest into it. No question. And I did not used to believe that, because I had a bad experience one time. But now I absolutely, as long as I'm taking responsibility and taking action and using the coaching as a tool of my own to empower me, that allows me to develop new superpowers for me to hit new levels. And so I get inspired by the fact that I'm able to beat my own expectations, which is something that's kind of new. Is I'm starting to, beat my own records, if you will, whatever I have in my head, my own limitations. And frankly, I get to see, I've got a 20-year-old and an 8-year-old son, and both of them are completely different personalities, but both of them take off and start running in some direction on something that's cool. And I'm like, man, that is inspiring, because I want to make sure that I'm there when they get to the next stage of their life and they're doing something really cool, that I'm there just backing them up and cheering them on and doing whatever I can to be there, not sitting in a cubicle or having to work in the office all day long. And so it's inspiring to me to get to real milestones, not just like, oh, someday I'll get to that, which is kind of the way I've always goal planned. Is that, yeah, eventually that'll pan out. Is I'm getting a way more intentional about what I'm working on now, what I'm focused on now. Pareto all day long. What's the 20% that I'm focused on? And kind of like those tasks that drag down your energy, that rob you of your energy, get rid of the 80%, get rid of everything else that is slowing me down from reaching what I'm intending to go after. And so I'm going to blame my kids for being inspiring to me, but at the same time, it's also when you get connected with the right people, with the right coaching team and specialist team that can help you to run faster. Oh, man, that is unbelievably cool.
Phenomenal. Absolutely phenomenal. I love that. I love that you're able to spend the time with the kids and actually see things going on versus being in the business every single day and be able to run faster. So that's very inspiring to me just to hear that. So I appreciate you sharing that with us. Brian, I just want to thank you for taking the time to sit down with me, share your story, share your journey, the incredible nuggets of wisdom that you dropped for us here today. So thank you so much for doing that and being here and sitting with us today.
Absolutely. I just hope that some of the pain, you can't avoid the pain, just because you learn from somebody else, it doesn't mean that you can't go through it. You're not going to have to go through it yourself, because you're not really going to appreciate, you're not really going to empower yourself until you run, full speed into a wall and realize like, oh, I shouldn't have done that. I need to do something different. So unfortunately, that's kind of life, but don't be afraid to run into walls. Figuratively.
Yeah, figuratively, yes. Well, Brian, thank you again. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.